Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive, real-world collision. What actually happens when the frictionless, move fast, and break things ideology of Silicon Valley crashes head-on into the messy, absolutely vital infrastructure of global humanitarian aid? We're taking a really close look at the recent actions surrounding the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and exploring how abstract tech concepts are suddenly, quite literally, dictating life and death in the physical world. It is a fascinating, if sobering, look at what happens when software engineering philosophy tries to rewrite global pipelines. Okay, let's kick things off with this wild quote directly from Elon Musk. Spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. According to our sources, this statement perfectly captures his specific approach to dismantling federal structures. It's an approach that's deeply rooted in tech culture, right? Where destruction is rapid, structural, and honestly, often totally irreversible. We aren't talking about slow bureaucratic reform here. It's about tearing the whole old system down overnight. So let's see how this exact philosophy plays out on the ground when you apply it to global aid. Here is our structural roadmap for today. 1. The rise of agentic kingship. 2. The government wood chipper. 3. The Lancet mortality projections. 4. Demanding a show orphan. And 5. The defamation battle. We're going to map these abstract sociological tech concepts directly onto real-world political and legal events. All right, part 1. Rise of agentic kingship. Centralized power in the digital age. Let's unpack a foundational theoretical framework from our sources that really helps explain the mindset behind all this. So what exactly is agentic kingship? Well, our sources describe it as an environment where centralized algorithms, or, the tech monarchs who control them, dictate the terms entirely from the top down. It's essentially a system of absolute, unaccountable power. It rolls back those traditional democratic checks and balances, and it leaves citizens and government agencies as passive subjects to a sort of digital king. You don't negotiate with this kind of authority. You just obey its parameters. Think of it this way. In one scenario, you're the sovereign pilot. You're an independent actor executing commands locally and keeping total control of your own hardware. But contrast that with digital tenancy. Our sources call this an interface inversion. Simply put, it means you don't use the tool anymore. The tool manages you. You're just a passive subject asking a central algorithm for permission to act. Keep that weird power dynamic in mind as we look at how this philosophy interacts with the physical world. Section 2, the government wood chipper. Applying tech logic to the state. Let's see what happens when you take this digital monarch philosophy and aim it directly at the federal government's foreign aid budget. First, we've got to define the wood chipper effect. In computer science, this describes a fatal flaw where vital information is completely and irreversibly destroyed. Imagine a blender. Once you hit puree, you can never piece the original data back together again. Our sources argue this perfectly mirrors DOGE's approach to government bloat, chaotic cuts that permanently destroy the highly complex underlying inputs needed for humanitarian aid to actually function. Now, let's put a number on this. 83%. Yeah, 83%. According to our sources, that is the staggering portion of USAID programs that were abruptly canceled in just a matter of weeks, right after an executive freeze on foreign development assistance. This wasn't some gradual phase down or a carefully targeted audit. It was a massive, immediate halt that sent total shockwaves through a global infrastructure that millions of people rely on every single day. And get this, the way these cuts happened is honestly pretty mind-blowing. These massive terminations were reportedly executed by a handful of tech workers in their 20s, with absolutely zero prior government experience. They were terminating over $100 million in grants simply by running AI-generated keyword searches, literally just mapping rapid, algorithmic software logic directly onto physical supply chains, without a second thought about what those keywords actually supported in the real world. The fallout on the ground? Absolutely immediate and severe. Delicate global health and humanitarian systems were instantly paralyzed. We're talking about HIV and AIDS medications being halted. Funding for $2 malaria bed nets just frozen. Critical Ebola prevention campaigns abruptly canceled. And soup kitchens feeding famine-stricken populations forced to shut down. These were rapid algorithmic cuts applied to physical pipelines that literally keep vulnerable populations alive. Which brings us to Section 3. The Lancet mortality projections, the hard reality of the substrate. This is where we have to examine the grim realities caused by treating a government agency like a disruptive tech startup. We really need to look at the math here, and the numbers are frankly staggering. A peer-reviewed study published in the highly respected medical journal The Lancet projected that if these sweeping cuts stay in place, it could result in 4.5 million additional child deaths by the year 2030. 4.5 million. That is the stark, mathematically modeled human cost of rapidly dismantling decades of global health infrastructure overnight. So why does this happen? Well, it's actually pretty simple. In software, if you make a mistake, you just revert the code, right? No big deal. But in reality, when you suddenly sever the funding, the physical substrate breaks. It causes an immediate lethal collapse in global supply chains. Clinics lose the diesel for their ambulances, community health workers are fired on the spot, and the literal pipelines transporting life-saving medicines run entirely dry. And this isn't just abstract data on a spreadsheet. Journalists on the ground are recording real, individualized human costs directly tied to this freeze. A young girl named Jabia died of malaria simply because her family couldn't replace a $2 bed net and local clinics lacked medicine. Boys like Peter Dande and Evany Enzu died after their HIV medications were interrupted. And in the Democratic Republic of Congo, over 300 people died in a new Ebola outbreak right after prevention funds were initially cut. This is exactly what happens when code breaks the substrate. Section 4. Demanding a show orphanage. The modality mismatch. Next, we're going to examine the profound and honestly bizarre disconnect between digital tech expectations and physical humanitarian reality. So, our sources call this disconnect a modality mismatch. It's the severe friction you get when you try to force continuous, messy, vulnerable human reality into rigid, deterministic digital structures. It's quite literally like trying to force a raging river through a tiny square pipe. The logic of one system simply does not and cannot map onto the reality of the other without causing massive destruction. This friction becomes impossible to ignore when you compare the expectations against the reality. On one side, you have Musk operating from this gamified tech mindset, reportedly demanding a literal show orphan on a Zoom call to justify global funding. On the other side, the physical reality. We are talking about highly vulnerable children in developing nations who completely lack basic medical, let alone digital infrastructure to just hop on a video call. It is the ultimate modality mismatch. Journalist Nicholas Kristof really hits the nail on the head here regarding the stakes of this mismatch. When you're dealing with an aid agency, when you make mistakes, then the result is dead kids. It perfectly emphasizes the view that reckless disruption in this specific sector has uniquely irreversible consequences. You can't just issue a software patch for a lost life. In the physical world, trial and error has a permanent, fatal cost. Finally, Section 5, the defamation battle, the legal enclosure. Let's look at how this massive clash of ideologies triggered a high-stakes legal feud over free speech, accountability, and defamation. Okay, so let's quickly trace the timeline of this legal enclosure. Late 2024, Musk is appointed to lead DOGE. Fast forward to early 2025, and the massive USAID cuts begin, which prompts aid organizations to start filing lawsuits. By June 2025, Congressman Ro Khanna is publicly demanding Musk answer for the consequences of all this. And then in July 2025, right after Khanna cites the Lancet study's mortality projections, Musk actually threatens to sue the congressman for defamation. Now, legally speaking, proving defamation here has an incredibly high bar. Because Elon Musk is a public figure, he has to overcome what's called the actual malice standard established by the Supreme Court. That means he has to successfully prove two distinct things in court. First, that the statement is completely demonstrably false, and second, that Representative Khanna either knew it was false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth when he made the claim. So proving actual malice, that's a massive, massive hill to climb, even for a tech billionaire, especially when you look at the defenses. Khanna's claim that Musk should answer to Congress is robustly backed by Article 1 of the Constitution regarding appropriated payments. And that claim about 4.5 million child deaths, that is grounded in peer-reviewed modeling published by The Lancet. It is incredibly difficult to legally prove that someone relying on a venerable medical journal is telling an intentional lie. As we've seen today, mapping digital operating systems and Silicon Valley disruption tactics directly onto fragile human lives creates massive, irreversible shockwaves. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. When we treat the physical world exactly like software, who takes responsibility when the code breaks reality? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll catch you next time.